Good afternoon, viewers of my channel. Good afternoon, 16% of women and 84% of men, as well as 3.2% of subscribers and, accordingly, 96.8% of people without a subscription. Which is very bad. Please subscribe, it doesn't cost you anything, but it will be very useful for me to develop the channel. So, today I want to tell you and show you a video about my visit to a real missile silo complex. The silo missile system is of the Dervina type. It is designed for the R-12 or SS-4 Sandal missiles according to the NATO classification. The R-12 missiles had a range of up to 2,000 kilometers, and they were medium range, so they could not reach the United States, but they reliably targeted the whole of Europe. I'm not kidding. From the court, the circle with a radius of 2,000 kilometers included the whole of Germany, France, Great Britain, and half of Ireland, Italy, almost all of Greece, and the north of Turkey. And the warhead on this missile could be of two types, 1 megaton capacity and 2.3 megaton capacity. This will be in understandable terms 55 Hiroshima and 128 Hiroshima, respectively. It was the most common missile in the USSR that could carry nuclear and thermonuclear weapons. These missiles were produced in two versions, for mine-based and above-ground-based applications. And they were divided like this. The rocket regiment consisted of 3 divisions. One was a mining division, and 2 were above ground. In the above ground ones, the missiles were stored in secure hangars. And if necessary, they were rolled out onto the launch tables. The warhead was attached, lifted, refueled, and launched. The warheads were stored separately from the missiles. Since the warhead is a product that requires careful and qualified treatment, they were stored in special conditions, where a special temperature, humidity, and even air composition were maintained. This is already the case for next-generation missiles. The rocket was refueled at the factory, the warhead was installed at the factory, everything was hermetically packed, and did not require maintenance for 20 years. Despite the fact that the fuel in the Soviet rockets was liquid, unlike the American ones, where solid was used. And liquid fuel was much more difficult to handle, but it provided more power. Now the above-ground ones are still there, some still exist, and almost all the mine ones have been reclaimed. Well, because leaving such objects unattended is quite dangerous. Well, first of all, someone can just fall through there, because in some places I saw even mines were just open. Let me remind you, the depth of the mine is more than 30 meters. Well, really, it wasn't in Latvia, and not in Lithuania, it was somewhere on Ukraine. Anyway, if you get in there and be careless, you can easily fall into some open hatch and break your arm or leg. And with a broken arm, you're no longer Indiana Jones. Anyway, look in the dark with a broken arm to get out of there. So it was a dangerous enough facility, and that's why everything has now been reclaimed. But there is only one mining complex left in Lithuania. Then the owner was immediately found, who did not let the looters disassemble it, as it happened with other similar objects. First on non-ferrous metal, then on ferrous metal, and then they just broke concrete to get iron fittings out of it. You might be surprised, but it's come to this. There was an owner right away, and then this owner found European money and opened a Cold War museum here. This museum is located in a national park, 20 kilometers north of the city of Plunge, Lithuania. Since I visited this missile base on a Tuesday in February, I got a unique opportunity to be here alone. And I got a unique opportunity to film everything here, without any interference. In the underground missile complex, we are greeted by several hermetically sealed doors. And since this facility found an owner immediately after the military left, all the original doors are in their places. A guard meets us at the entrance. Here are the plans for both floors, and the shafts with service rooms. Some rooms are not accessible to the public. Well, first of all, of the 4 missile silos, only one is available. Because they are all the same, and you won't see anything new in the others. Other rooms are used by the museum staff as office space. Thirdly, this is not a state museum, and the owner of the museum does not have the opportunity to obtain all the documentation from Russia, in order to restore all the equipment that was here during the operation of the missile base. So, some exhibits are not directly related to the operation of missile bases of this type. Once again, this is a private museum. And for a private museum, the exposition is beyond praise. If possible, be sure to visit this museum. I've only seen this museum better in Ukraine, near the city of Pervomaisk. But there were other types of missiles there, too. There were SS-18 Satatin missiles there, and the museum belongs to the state. And keeping it running. Real officers of the rocket forces are engaged. This museum positions itself as the Museum of the Cold War. And from the very first hall, we are attuned to the atmosphere of the beginning of the Cold War. In the first photos, you see Wernher von Braun, the father of the German missile program. And after the end of the war, the head of the American missile program. But it wasn't just the United States that used the experience gained by the Germans. Soviet liquid-fueled rockets also started with the V-2 rocket. In the Soviet Union, it was also put into service, for a short time, under the name R-1, Rocket 1. Before that, the Soviet Union used solid-fuel rockets. Declassified documents about the drop-shot plan are visible on the stands. The plan put forward by the US militarists for the nuclear bombing of the Soviet Union. But on August 29, 1949, the Soviet Union tested its nuclear bomb. And it became clear to the militarists that without consequences for the United States, it would not be possible to bomb the USSR. This museum is located in a national park, 20 kilometers north of the city of Plunge, Lithuania. Since I visited this missile base on a Tuesday in February, I got a unique opportunity to be here alone. And I got a unique opportunity to film everything here, without any interference. In the underground missile complex, we are greeted by several hermetically sealed doors. And since this facility found an owner immediately after the military left, all the original doors are in their places. A guard meets us at the entrance. Here are the plans for both floors, and the shafts with service rooms. Some rooms are not accessible to the public. Well, first of all, of the 4 missile silos, only one is available. Because they are all the same, and you won't see anything new in the others. Other rooms are used by the museum staff as office space. Thirdly, this is not a state museum, and the owner of the museum does not have the opportunity to obtain all the documentation from Russia. In order to restore all the equipment that was here during the operation of the missile base. So, some exhibits are not directly related to the operation of missile bases of this type. Once again, this is a private museum. And for a private museum, the exposition is beyond praise. If possible, be sure to visit this museum. I've only seen this museum better in Ukraine, near the city of Pervomaisk. But there were other types of missiles there, too. There were SS-18 Satatin missiles there, and the museum belongs to the state. And keeping it running. Real officers of the rocket forces are engaged. This museum positions itself as the Museum of the Cold War. And from the very first hall, we are attuned to the atmosphere of the beginning of the Cold War. In the first photos, you see Wernher von Braun, the father of the German missile program. And after the end of the war, the head of the American missile program. But it wasn't just the United States that used the experience gained by the Germans. Soviet liquid-fueled rockets also started with the V-2 rocket. In the Soviet Union, it was also put into service, for a short time, under the name R-1, Rocket 1. Before that, the Soviet Union used solid-fuel rockets. Declassified documents about the drop-shot plan are visible on the stands. The plan put forward by the US militarists for the nuclear bombing of the Soviet Union. But on August 29, 1949, the Soviet Union tested its nuclear bomb. And it became clear to the militarists that without consequences for the United States, it would not be possible to bomb the USSR. But here we are shown what the life of the shift on duty looked like. Pay attention to the drawings on the walls. There are plans for above-ground missile bases that were located on the territory of Lithuania.
Наземные ракетные комплексы, какие были в Литве, наземные. Вот смотрите, Кармилава, Укмерге, один, второй, Таураге, первый, Второй.
The following stand shows a diagram of an underground missile system and how the missiles were loaded into the silos, as well as refueling. These are first-generation missiles, and they were in the mines, not refueled. The fuel was also located here in the underground complex, and I'll show you where it was stored later.
И комплекс управления. Ну, и здесь. Здесь.
The following shows weapons that were not directly related to the missile system.
Базуки, РПГ-7 и какой-то пулемет огромный, может какой-нибудь авиационный, который к сути дела не имеет никакого отношения. Как и патроны, подкалиберные снаряды.
Of all things, pay attention to the largest cannon shell with a yellow cap. The smallest atomic bomb could be this size. The capacity of such a projectile was 2.5 kilotons. Let me remind you that an 18-kiloton bomb fell on Hiroshima. The United States also had similar ammunition. I hope now you understand that the USSR and the USA have accumulated too many atomic weapons, and it had to be shortened. And here we see how the missile silo was built. The depth of the mine is 30 meters, the length of the rocket is 22 meters. The hat above the missile silo was lifted on jacks, and 2 winches pulled it to the side. In its normal position, the hat sat snugly on the shaft head. At the very top, we see a balcony that was attached to the hat. It was designed to serve the warhead, because the rocket's engines were fired in the mine. Newer rockets are ejected from the mine by a powder charge, and the engines start already in the air. So, the engines of this rocket were launched directly in the mine. And in order for the rocket not to burn out of its own fire, places for the removal of the engine flame were provided for this. The mine could be reloaded. The second set of missiles, as well as metal structures that burned during launch, was available at the missile base. But it took several days to recharge the missile silo. Since 2 days were set aside for the mine to simply cool down to such a state that it was possible to work in it. No one had counted on a third salvo, because according to the concept that existed then, the war should not have lasted more than 1 week. Next, we see the firearms that were in service with the USSR again. Makarov pistol and Kalashnikov assault rifles. AK-47 and AK-74. Heckler and Koch G3 weapons and the Uzi submachine gun are also presented. I must say that the Uzi had nothing to do with NATO at all. This is an Israeli development, and if it was in service somewhere in NATO countries, then only in special units. Because he looks good in Chuck Norris action movies, but not in the real army. Since it weighed like a normal assault rifle, and in terms of firepower, it was a submachine gun. That is, weaker than a full-fledged assault rifle. If we can call the upper floor a command floor, then the lower floor is a technical one. And here we see the layout of the upper floor, with all the equipment that should have been located here. Some of the equipment was taken away by the military when they removed the missile silos from combat duty, and some by looters who tried to dismantle the equipment in search of easy money. Because there was a lot of copper here, and there was a great temptation to make quick money.
И макет.
Next, we follow the layout of the town where the military lived. Houses for officers and barracks for soldiers. Now there is nothing left of this military town.
Как он назывался? Напишите в комментариях. Вот так. Дальше из городочка. Вот. Сами шахты. И отдельное было это вот
and a little to the side, there was a storage area for warheads. The rockets for the second salvo were also stored there. I'll show it at the end of the video. Here is a map of Lithuania, and a big star marks the place where the Baltic Sea is located next to us. We are located 50 kilometers from the sea. Kaliningrad, formerly Königsberg, is located in the lower part. The other asterisks are the location of other positional areas. Only the positional areas located in Lithuania are marked here. In fact, the whole of Latvia was crammed with missile bases, and the Kaliningrad region too. In the next room we see rocket technology.
Еще один очень интересный зал. Ну вот, макет ракеты Р-12, которая здесь стояла.
A mock-up of the R-12U SS-4 rocket. Head unit,
Часть.
oxidizer tank, instrument compartment between the tanks,
Какой-то тут приборный отсек и
fuel tank
второй бак.
for engines.
Сопла.
The expanding skirt at the end of the rocket was an additional stabilizer in flight. This missile is not directly related to the Silo missile system. This is an anti-aircraft guided missile from the Cub missile system. According to the NATO classification SA-6A,
Широты моего. Широты моего объектива не хватает, чтобы вот хватает, чтобы заснять вот целиком. Вот.
now that's interesting. Here is a gyroscope, the heart of the rocket's navigation system. A product of the highest technologies of the 50s and 60s. With the help of such a gyroscope, it was possible to send rockets to a distance of 2,000 kilometers with an accuracy of 1 kilometer. And this is without any GPS correction. And considering that this rocket could carry a destructive force equal to 128 Hiroshima, higher accuracy was not needed. The second device is an active guidance system. At the top, we see some kind of parabolic guidance system antenna. There is no exact description.
Активная система управления.
Now let's go down to the lower floor.
Так.
There's a closed door that leads to a couple of shafts.
Вот. Дверь, которая уходит к следующий зал.
And the first hall that greets us is a hall dedicated to propaganda. Propaganda, as it should be primitive in order to reach the maximum number of people. And that one is visible. That both sides were not particularly imaginative. They showed themselves to be good, of course, but the enemy was like a fiend. To paraphrase, we are kind, intelligent, hard-working elves, they are vicious, aggressive orcs. And I must say, nothing has changed for a long time. I have nothing to comment on here you just have to watch. Next, we see some people on duty while performing their duties. Unfortunately, there is no information about what positions they held and what they are doing now. But it looks like a signalman. Halls in which there was some kind of electrical equipment. Unfortunately, the copper fever destroyed all the equipment.
Так. Это выход. Это сюда. Зал, в котором стояло какое-то электрооборудование. Один. Следующий зал.
On the other hand, there are drawings on the theme of civil defense. How to behave during a bombing, including a nuclear one. Destructive factors of a nuclear explosion. How to use a gas mask. How to make yourself a primitive breathing mask to protect yourself from dust, including radioactive dust. And they started to teach all this already at school. The Soviet Union was seriously preparing for a nuclear war, and was going to win it. Because chemical protection suits were not only for adults, but also for strollers, for very young children.
Вот как Советский Союз заботился о своих детях, о своем потомстве.
In the next room, there was a diesel generator. In peacetime, the underground mine complex was connected to external power supply. But in the event of a war, and especially a nuclear war, one of the first strikes would be inflicted on power plants. And for this reason, there was an autonomous generator. Judging by the size of the engine of this generator, it was possible to connect the nearest military camp to it. It is clear from the engine that they also wanted to cut it into pieces and scrap it. But due to the massiveness of the structure, they realized that cutting would take more time and gas than they could get money for.
Когда уже советские войска кто-то хотел вот распилить, вот идет шов, запил, но был он крепче, чем желание варваров. В следующем зале мы видим дизель-генератор. Или, вернее, то, что от него осталось. Вот, глядите. Мотор. А вот здесь должны были стоять, вот здесь на станинах должны были стоять сами генераторы, который крутил этот мотор.
Fuel tanks were located next to the generator room. There was fuel for the generator itself, as well as fuel for the rocket. A short instruction is written right on the wall, so that the people who worked here would always have it in front of their eyes.
Кто знает, насколько это корректно. Если вы в ракетчике напишите. Так, и вторая. А мы идем дальше. Так. О, литовский флаг.
Another exhibit that has no direct relation to the silo missile system.
Так. Опасно. Ясень перец. Так, Вот. И пошли мы к, как я понимаю, к ракетной шахте. Нет. А что, шахту нам не открыли? Или вот здесь мы пошли. В шахте. Опа. Так, всегда хотел знать, что вот здесь.
And we're going to the missile silos. Let me remind you that there are 4 missiles stationed here. I showed you the corridors to the 2 shafts a little earlier. There is no access there. And this is the corridor leading to the other 2 mines. The floor here is metal, and under the floor there were pipes through which the rocket was refueled and controlled. Halfway down the road to the mine, we are met by a warrior dressed in a heavy chemical protection suit. This was how it was supposed to be equipped, who was supposed to be in the zone of destruction by nuclear weapons immediately after the explosion. This suit is made of thick, rubberized fabric.
Перчатки. Бахилы вот такие. Так у нас были они зеленого цвета.
Let's move on to the missile silos.
Ух ты! Какая дырка!
Look, the airtight door has been preserved.
Моя ладонь,
It will pay attention to its thickness.
моя ладонь.
It is thicker than 10 centimeters. Such a door was needed if something went wrong during the launch of the rocket.
Не цельно летая.
If the rocket had exploded during launch, then this door would have been able to contain the sea of fire, and to save both personnel and other missiles from an accident.
Не работает. Вот она и шахта. Вот оголовок шахты. Пройдем мы по часовой
Pay
стрелке.
attention to the wheel through which the cable was passed, which pulled the hat over the rocket silo.
Так.
I've talked about this mechanism before, when I showed you a mock-up of a missile silo. And here's the winch itself, which was supposed to pull the hat off the shaft. There were 2 of them, and they were powered by electric motors, which are now dismantled.
Так. Дальше, дальше, дальше. Дальше, дальше, дальше.
There, in the darkness, was a second
Вторая
winch.
лебедка.
There were also
Которая в
backup
темноте.
exits.
Опа, резервный выход.
Behind these closed doors, there were
Ну,
jacks that
вероятно, здесь
lifted the
стояли
cap
домкраты.
of the mine.
За этими, которые вытаскивали, поднимали шапку, чтобы она могла спокойно съехать. И вот такая толщина бетона. Раз ладонь.
The walls of the missile silo are at least 0.5 meters thick.
Толщина бетона. Раз ладонь. Два ладонь. Три ладонь. В общем, 38 попугаев. 3 моих ладони. Взрослого человека. О! Глядите. Так. Сама шахта внизу.
Inside the shaft, the cardinal directions are marked.
Так.
2 more doors are visible below. There are narrow technical corridors designed for rocket maintenance.
О, одна дверь, вторая дверь. А я не знал, что там 2 двери. Так, окно, которое на головку. Опа. И заканчиваем круг. Кроме того, обратите внимание, цифры 335, 330, 320. Это, соответственно, где у нас направление, где у нас вот 0, соответственно, север. И мы пошли по кругу. О. Правила техники безопасности никто не отменял. Давайте посмотрим.
From above,
Вот
we
на
can
это.
see the balcony where the warhead was serviced.
На это,
The warheads were stored separately from the missiles.
потому что
This is for modern
естественно,
rockets. 5 minutes pass between receiving the launch order and the launch itself. For missiles of this type, about 2 hours pass between the order and the launch. Therefore, such a complex product as a thermonuclear warhead was stored separately.
одно дело,
In
чтобы
special
одну часть
conditions.
привинчивали,
I was in East Germany, in a nuclear weapons storage facility.
как на ракетах на
There was
современных, у
equipment that
которых,
ensured the storage of warheads, not only at the required temperature and humidity, but also the composition of the air was regulated.
о старте
I have a
силовой
video about
тренировки
this on my
подготовки
channel.
ракет.
If you are interested, I will also translate it into English.
И поэтому никакого не было смысла держать головку вот здесь, вот, потому что она изделие сложное, вот, и нечего. А тут могут быть солдаты, вот, интересующиеся ли с кривыми руками, которые могут что-нибудь сломать. Вот это же солдаты, им все интересно, это же мужики 18-летние, вот, у которых энергии хоть разбавляй. И ничто их не остановит от того, чтобы там залезть, покрутить, что-нибудь посмотреть. Вот когда же еще в жизни представится подобный случай?
I walk around the missile silo once more.
Пойдем.
There's nothing else to see here. The exit is not through the entrance, but through one of the emergency exits, which was made in the head of the missile silo.
Ну, и вот конец подземной части.
That's all. Subscribe to the channel and write comments.